Good evening and welcome to the Hasib Sabbagh Distinguished Lecture on Diplomacy. The late Hasib Sabbagh was a statesman who, through his unstinting efforts, sought to make this a better world. His daughter, Sana, follows in his footsteps, and we are delighted that she is Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Foreign Policy Association. I'm now going to turn to Sana to introduce our outstanding speaker. Sana?
Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Dario Gil, Director of IBM Research. Dr. Gil has direct responsibility for IBM's science agenda with a broad portfolio of activities spanning the physical sciences, the mathematical sciences, healthcare, and the life sciences. Dr. Gil is also responsible for IBM's Cognitive Solutions Research Agenda, which aims to create scientific and technological breakthroughs to differentiate IBM's solutions, businesses, and serves as an incubator for future cognitive industry solutions for IBM and its clients. The Research Division of IBM is a global organization with over 3,000 researchers across 12 laboratories and 21 locations, all devoted to advancing the frontiers of information technology. Prior to his current position, Dr. Gil was the Chief Operating Officer of IBM Research and the Vice President of AI and Quantum Computing, areas in which he continues to have broad responsibilities across IBM. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Dario Gil.
Thank you. Good evening. It is really an honor to be here with you, and I look forward to having a discussion on these most relevant of topics, artificial intelligence, which I know is top of mind and certainly part of the public discourse. And I thought one of the key objectives that I wanted to accomplish tonight is to demystify it as much as possible so that we can have a conversation as to what it will mean to society at large. First, as a brief introduction, this is where I work. This is the research headquarters of IBM. It's the T.J. Watson Research Center in Yorktown Heights. It's about an hour north of where we are right now, if that, and it's a beautiful building that was designed by Eero Saarinen in 1961 when it opened. And it's part of a global network of laboratories that, as it was alluded, we have about 3,000 scientists distributed all over the world. And next year will be our 75th year that we've operated a research division. So it's a rather unique institution, and it has had a wonderful track record it continues to do in fundamental scientific advances in the field of information and computation. So with that as a brief context of where I come from, I thought I would start by sharing some of the things that we may have seen in the news and in the public dialogue. We've seen, for example, in the news statements like this, where we hear China plans to use artificial intelligence to gain global economic dominance by 2030, So this was just a couple of years ago from MIT Tech Review. Or this quote from Vladimir Putin, where he says, "Artificial intelligence is the future, not just for Russia, but for all of humankind. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world." It's wow, big statements. We see also across, when we do comparisons of the level of investments, very often also gets pitted as a new form of race or arms race of some sort. And we see, for example, here investments between North America and in Asia, and in particularly China is typically very much highlighted in terms of priorities, and you see some numbers also for Europe. So it's most certainly the case that the field itself has become of national importance. It's not just in the context of corporations and universities, but at the level of sort of strategic importance of areas. So we've seen that as well. We also see the conversation in the context of jobs, and I thought I would share with you just a very short clip. I was recently at an event at Stanford about a month ago during the launch of something called Stanford High, the Human Center AI Institute that was created. And in the big launch, there were many dignitaries and eminents that came around for the launch, including Henry Kissinger. And one of the speakers was Governor Newsom, who came at the very end of the day and sort of gave this very impassioned speech about the concerns that he was starting to see from his constituents about the fears of AI. And in one of his moments of the talk, he got talking about jobs and some of the recent experiences. So let me play you that clip for a minute.
I remember reading the other day, and I don't mean this as a negative, but there's a company, Nightscope, some of you know well, maybe one of you invented it, forgive me, but one of the folks that worked there said the following about this technology that allows the replacement of security guards, these large robotic units. He said, no pensions, no workers' comp, no complaining. Whoa. Meaning humans complain, how dare they demand workers' comp? Company called Momentum Machines. What gets repeated gets replaced. They're in the hamburger making business. They're going after 3.5, 3.6 million fast food workers. The CEO of that company, with all due respect, it's fascinating. I'm not indicting the company, but it was an interesting comment. He said, our job's not to make employees more efficient. It's to, quote unquote, obviate the need for them. Whoa. I was excited. Finally went to Amazon Go, and didn't have to go up to Seattle. They have one now downtown, my old town, San Francisco. Fascinating. But there are 3.4 million cashiers that don't think it's that fascinating. What the hell do we do with them? Cashiers, retail, F&B, office clerks, these are literally the top job categories in the United States of America. It's not just about trucks, though it is if you are a male in the United States. Driving's the #1 profession. This is anxiety-inducing.
Global dominance, jobs. Wow, lot of things going on. So let's take a look at, for example, skills. What about students? If you go to MIT or Stanford and you look at the level of number of students enrolled on this class called Introduction to Machine Learning, maybe a class that about a decade ago had 30 students or so. Now you're seeing 1,000 students being enrolled in Introduction to Machine Learning at Stanford. Over 800, 984 actually at MIT. So basically, it's become kind of like a layer of knowledge that almost every student is going to want to know. So what is this thing? What is AI, and why is there so much talk about it? So I thought I would take a few minutes to explain what it is and bring it a bit down to earth, and then discuss the implications of it. So the term itself was coined in a joint workshop that was organized between MIT and IBM at Dartmouth in 1956. And you can see some of the participants there, including giants in the field like Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy and Claude Shannon. And you can tell some of the IBMers because they wear bow ties and things like that. So, and since then, it's been a scientific endeavor that has been pursuing the goal of trying to create systems, computers, that could mimic different forms of human intelligence. Now, within the field of AI, you may have heard a number of terms, and I'm going to focus on some of these today. Within AI, there's a category called machine learning. Within machine learning, there's something called neural networks. And within neural networks, there's something called deep learning, which maybe some of you have heard about. Is certainly a lot in the press, right? People say deep learning all the time. So what is this thing? What is deep learning? Just to understand it, we gotta go back to the turn of the 20th century, where one of the fathers of modern neuroscience, fellow Spaniard, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, who was a Nobel Prize winner in physiology and medicine, he was among the first to understand that in our brains we have these cells called neurons, that neurons have these long tails called axons, and that the intersection of axons, when they meet each other, they form synapses. And that these synapses are deeply connected to memory and learning. And he was a wonderful illustrator, by the way, and he would draw these hand diagrams that you see here when he was observing down the microscope, like these neurons and neural structure. What is interesting is that with no more than this biological inspiration, that in our brain we had these neurons and neural networks, starting in the 1940s, mathematicians created an abstraction. And they created an idea called the artificial neural network. And they replaced those cells with diagrams like this, where each blue dot represents a neuron. You read this diagram from left to right, so there's layers of neuron. You see these columns in here. When we use the term a deep neural network, all we mean is that there are many layers of these neurons concatenated and connected to one another. And the connection between the neurons, the white lines that you see here, are the synapses, in quote. And all we're trying to do when we create a neural network, and when we say we train a machine or we train an AI system or a neural network, is learn the strength of the connection between these neurons. We're trying to determine how connected these blue dots, these neurons, should be with one another, and when should each neuron fire and activate. And with that idea, we can create a quite general form of representation that allows us to learn directly by providing examples to the neural networks. By giving it examples to the machine, it can learn by repeated exposure to these examples and learning the strength of the connections between the neurons. So it has this loose biological inspiration, right? And to be fair, the idea was very interesting, but it didn't work very well for many, many decades. And then in 2012, that whole idea began to work. And it began to work not because there was an algorithmic revolution, but rather because two other trends intersected it. One was data. It turns out that to get these neural networks to work, you need to give it lots and lots of examples. So you need lots and lots of digital data that has been labeled to give enough examples. I'm talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of examples. And you may need to have millions and millions of images, for example, if you were doing classification. And the other trend was computational power. It turns out you need to have a big and very sophisticated computers to do it at scale. And that led to quite a revolution in the field of computer vision. And that's the graph that I'm showing here on the right, where in 2012, there was the largest improvement in the history of the field of computer vision in terms of accuracy of being able to label images. And you've seen that since then, it has gradually progressed such that we have superhuman performance using these kinds of machines. And the reality is that these other trends are really powerful. I mean, I'm sure you're all, very familiar with like how much data there is in the world, but 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created every day. And 90% of all the data in the world was just created in the last couple of years, right? And this is a trend that is not going to stop, and in some ways, in fundamental ways, data is the fuel that is enabling the power of modern day AI. So that's one important trend to keep in mind, and I think when we talk later, it will be important to discuss the role of data in terms of societal and government regulation. The other one is computation. Just to give you a flavor, last year we delivered, IBM designed and built the two largest supercomputers in the world, and we delivered them to the Department of Energy in the United States. And just to give you a figure for how much the field has advanced, these machines are capable of performing 200,000 trillion calculations per second. So the combination of data with computation and indeed these algorithmic advances is what's fueling AI. Those are the three things that have come together. As a result of which, a narrow form of artificial intelligence has begun to work. If there's nothing else I could convey to you today, I think that adding these adjectives in front of AI will help clarify a tremendous amount the conversation. Because when people use the word AI, it's kind of an unfortunate term, actually. It's a scary and confusing term. And it means all sorts of things to different people. Adding these things in front is very helpful. Narrow AI. What is narrow AI? Well, narrow AI is a form of AI, I would say by proxy is what's happened recently with deep learning. It is a form of AI that if you have a well-defined task, let's say identifying, if you have lots of examples of melanoma as an example, can we build a machine that is very good at detecting whether we have a cancerous form or not? Very well-defined task in a well-defined domain for which we have lots and lots of examples that have been previously classified by experts. If we have that, we can build systems that perform that task typically with superhuman accuracy. That is a long way from general artificial intelligence. We, humans, have general intelligence. We're not capable of just performing one task in one domain. We can do many tasks, many domains, with autonomy, with reasoning, and not just learning, and so on. That is decades away. And when we in scientists put things like 2050 and beyond, what we're really saying is we have no idea, right, when it is, right? So way, way out there. So today we have a narrow form of AI, general AI, many decades away, although we'll talk about that in a second. And what is next in the field is a broader form of AI. So the reason that you're seeing all this progress in terms of tools that I'm sure many of you use in terms of language translation or natural language processing or having a voice assistant that you can talk to a smart speaker and can recognize is because this deep learning has begun to work just in the last 6 or 7 years. So next for the field will be the combination of not just learning, but combining it with the great other tradition in AI, which is the field of logic and reasoning and symbolic manipulation. And by bringing those things together, we think that over the next decade, there will be significant progress in the field, although far from this general form of AI. Now, the reality is that if you're trying to build some form of artificial intelligence, it should do many of these tasks that is listed here. It should learn, it should represent knowledge, it should be able to reason, and it should interact with humans. And there's a wonderful tradition in the community of AI of using some form of grand challenge, typically it's been games for some reason in the field, to demonstrate the possibilities of what AI can do at any given time. And remember, it's a field that's been with us since the 50s. So you see, for example, from the very beginning of the field, 1959, Arthur Samuel, who was an IBMer, who coined the term machine learning, built then a program that played checkers. We've seen in 1992, for example, Jerry Tesoro, who created a system that just looking at the pixels in the screen, learned how to play backgammon by just showing it pixels. An early preview of what we've seen recently with Go, as an example. In 1997, we built a machine that played chess against Garry Kasparov. 2011, a machine that played Jeopardy. So there's been a long history, and once we had built that machine that played on Jeopardy, we asked our research community what should be the next grand challenge that would be interesting and evocative, right, to the community at large. And we ended up settling on a problem that was beyond games. And we ended up selecting a project called Project Debater. And simply put, we decided to build a machine that could engage with humans in a full life debate. And we thought that if AI was going to realize its promise, it would have to live in the messy world of humans, right? In the world of controversy and arguments. And so we created this machine. I'm going to show you a very short clip that is capable within one domain, right? Debating, capable of modeling some form of human dilemmas and form principled arguments, that has to engage in listening comprehension and engage in a process of rebuttal once it hears things, that it has to be able to generate speeches on the fly. And ultimately, we're doing this because we think there could be complementary skills to help us make better decisions and deal with complexity. So you're going to see a short clip of a debate that we had in San Francisco earlier this year against a European debate champion. And given the motion, in this case, the motion was whether we should subsidize preschools. That was the only input that the system received. The system has to automatically generate a 4-minute opening speech on the fly. The human delivers their 4-minute opening speech. The system has to be listening to those 4 minutes and generate a 4-minute rebuttal. Then human delivers 4-minute rebuttal, and there's 2 minutes of closing argument. And the whole thing is recorded, so I'll be happy to send a link to all of you. You can watch the whole thing. We're just going to show a very short clip of the system.
Greetings, Harish. I have heard you hold the world record in debate competition wins against humans, but I suspect you've never debated a machine. Welcome to the future. For decades, research has demonstrated that high-quality preschool is one of the best investments of public dollars. Regarding poverty, research clearly shows that a good preschool can help kids overcome the disadvantages often associated with poverty. The OECD has recommended that governments subsidize pre-primary education to boost performance in poor areas.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here for this historic event. And it certainly was a pleasure to listen to Project Debater in a competitive environment at the age of 3 or 4, when you're learning that that other child is potentially better than you, when you realize you aren't necessarily as talented as someone else. That huge psychological damage for many children may mean that preschool is actively harmful.
My opponent claimed that preschools are harmful. I believe my argument suggested that the benefits outweigh the potential disadvantages. I touched upon 3 issues: children, students, and crime. Specifically, I noted that preschool education improves children's development. In addition, I suggested that attending preschool helps students succeed. And a final point to consider is that preschool can prevent future crime. We should subsidize preschools. Thanks for your attention.
So we asked the audience at the end, because we want to make it entertaining, and we partner with Intelligence Square. I don't know if some of you listen to them. They have a wonderful program, and we asked the stands of the audience before the debate, after the debate, and we asked a second question also about who better enrich your knowledge, right? So on the stands, it turns out, not surprising, in San Francisco, like 80-something% of the audience was in favor of subsidizing preschools. It turns out that that was not a good choice for us. Like the intelligent debate crowd said, like, you should have chosen a topic more polarizing. But at any rate, so that was one question. But what I thought was very interesting is when we asked the audience about who better enrich your knowledge, 55% of the audience said Project Debater. Now overall, in terms of who changed more of the stands, the human debater won. And this has been very consistent with all the practice rounds that we have been building over time. Because if you think about it, the machine is very good at being able to combine sort of like these sort of reason, fact-based arguments and evidence. But the machine doesn't live in the human world, right? And we find each other much more engaging and persuasive. So there are sort of complementary skills that come to bear. The ability of us to be expressive is so much stronger than the best machines that we have been built so far. But the ability to gather and bring forth evidence across all the digital realm is very different in terms of what the machines can do. So ultimately what we see is a partnership, right, between people and these kinds of systems. And the reality is that, as you all know, we pay an enormous price for not knowing, right? Whether we're talking about medical diagnosis or accidents that may happen with the world of, say, oil exploration or in financial markets. The ability to understand the complex world we have built is really, really demanding for all of us. And in some ways, one way to look at AI is in the long continuum that we have had over many, many decades and centuries right now to be able to enhance human capability. We have built technology to enhance or ability to operate physically and do things in the world, or the limitations of connectivity with one another and be able to reach across great distances, or productivity limitations, right, with all sorts of tools that help us be more productive. So perhaps this is just the latest generation of technology and capability to enhance our capabilities. And in this case, what we're dealing with is complexity limitations. And that in the end, the systems that we're creating are ones that enhance our cognition or cognitive abilities. So it will be this complement between human and machines, where we are going to bring our own expertise and knowledge or common sense or self-directed goals and or values, but the machine is going to bring also something to the table, right? It will bring the access to all the digital knowledge that we've accumulated, the ability to do large-scale math and pattern recognition and forms of statistical reasoning for which we're not well suited. There's also enormous opportunity to bring some of this technology to do social good. And, perhaps we get a chance in a minute to have some of the discussions about where is it most indicative to apply some of these powerful capabilities. And we've launched a program that started 3 to 4 years ago in the research division and now is greatly expanding, not only across IBM, but more broadly, around bringing AI for social good. And you can sort of scan and see some of the projects that we're tackling, working in partnership with, many nonprofits, other institutions, with the UN, and, and other major players around bringing some of this core capability to deal with some very fundamental issues as well that had to do or require some kind of new insight. So all of this is well and good, but what is this, back to the beginning, right, of this anxiety and fears? I would argue that that has to do with something else, and is with this term of general artificial intelligence. Because were that to manifest itself, indeed we're talking about something that has nothing short of revolutionary potential. I would argue that until something like that happens, or if that happens, it is more conducive to think of the world of AI today and the next decade as software, as more and more sophisticated software. But no more than that. But where artificial general intelligence to manifest itself, it would have a different set of implications. So how is that being pursued? What are some of the intellectual directions in which the community of scientists is exploring it? I would say, broadly speaking, there's sort of 3 threads that are being explored. One is a little bit a hand-wavy, but maybe powerful, and is an argument of exponentials. This is what Ray Kurzweil would say when he talks about the singularity, which I'm sure you've heard about. So basically it goes like this. It says, well, we have all these exponential technologies that are taking place. The rate and pace of technology is accelerating. There's more and more scientists and capability all over the world. And these exponentials are going to add up. And just in the same way, I said that an old idea that didn't work quite well began working in 2012 because 2 other things intersected, data and computation. Imagine that, but for a number of decades. Many other things converging, and eventually, hand-wavy argument, something special happened. Maybe that's the answer of what will occur. So that's one strain of thought. The other one says, look, the way we have to build systems is we got to do learning based on feedback from the environment. In the field of AI, that's the crowd of reinforcement learning, if you know something about the field, which is, okay, so I'm going to give an objective function, I'm going to reward this agent depending on whether it achieves or fails on its goals. And by this process of creating this feedback loop within the world, I'm going to experiment and learn and learn and learn, and I'm going to bootstrap myself through that learning, right? So that's that community of reinforcement learning. And then the other community basically says, look, there's no way to get there unless we accumulate knowledge and we have a persistent representation of knowledge. For us humans, that has been language, right? And be able to accumulate that knowledge and make logical connections with that knowledge and reason over knowledge, right? So these are 3 distinct communities, and obviously they can come together. And a progression may look something like this, where we have seen a form of writing software that was based on rules. So whatever you wanted to accomplish, you had to write down how you thought the world worked, and you wrote down rules, and you implemented it in a program, and you executed that program. The next paradigm was to say, forget about writing all the rules. Just give me lots and lots of examples, and I'll derive the rules automatically in my neural network from the examples you give me. But I don't write the rules by hand anymore. And that has generated a lot of progress. So next steps as you go on down this road is to say, to the extent that as an accumulation, that learning, we can represent knowledge much more broadly and make those semantic connections across knowledge. And we could get to the point where the machines could really read and understand something as opposed to process language. That would be a big inflection point. That would be the equivalent of like really reading and understanding. The next one, automated programming, will be the equivalent for machines for us to write. Can machines write code by themselves? And the final stage is, could machines experiment? When they have gaps in knowledge, could they experiment and fill the gaps of knowledge? So can you get to the point where they can read, write, and experiment, right, in some form? Were any of those things to manifest themselves in serious fashion, we may know that we're at an inflection point. Now, because ultimately this will have these profound implications, I think it's very important that every institution who is acting in this space has a set of principles and rules. We published ours a few years back, called the Principles for the Cognitive Era, and it's a document that I encourage you to look at. And we said three things. Purpose, that the purpose of these systems should be designed to augment and not replace human intelligence. Trust and transparency in how these systems get developed and how we handle the data that gets used to train them. And skills, that we have a responsibility to educate and support workforce evolution as these capabilities bring more maturity. So I'll close for discussion with a set of topics that tend to be the nature of the discussions in this topic of AI, that are non-technological elements of what I just shared. For example, one of the things that comes up a lot is this idea of the singularity, so the fears that AI will surpass human intelligence and then will evolve beyond the ability of humans to control it. Trust and transparency and algorithmic accountability. To talk about, how are we making, to the extent that we're deploying these systems in complex decision making, how is this being done, and how was it trained, and what is the ability of these systems to generate explanations whether when something goes right or whether something goes wrong. Bias, diversity, and inclusion. If you're using systems like this to make decisions and they're trained from examples, if the examples you give them are biased, the system will be biased. How will we guarantee the training of these systems? Value alignment. How will we align these systems with human codes and values? And what happens when different societies that have different codes and values express and develop systems at scale? And finally, job loss, the fear of mass unemployment as AI and robots potentially take over our jobs. So I'll stop there, hopefully to bring a little bit, demystify what AI is. Today, I think I will encourage in the discussion as we talk about what's in your mind and what would you like to bring up, to make a distinction between the narrow world of AI that we have today and general AI. Acknowledging that general AI is many decades away and we have no idea how to get there. And that narrow AI is a form of software that is very good about learning from data. So by putting things in context, it can guide a bit more what is the priority of problems we need to tackle. But these are things for sure that are top of mind, I think, across society, and I encourage your comments and discussions. Thank you. Oh, please.
I think mine's Elbryn Kimmelman, and I'm on the board of Foreign Policy Association. Thank you. I think mine is more a comment than a question, and that is this category of job loss. We never think of brooms being a job loss or a washing machine as being a job loss. So it's being politically presented as a negative, whereas most people, and this is what we see, a political movement, especially today, people want to have a little bit less of that work for more of the rewards. And I'm not saying that that's bad, I'm just saying calling it job loss, you know, if you called it slavery loss, it might represent what's happening. We will not have to do a lot of things that may not interest us to do when we have more AI in our life.
Sure.
You can comment on that.
Yes. First, don't read that this is my point of view. I'm not a fan of the singularity or anything. I'm just saying these are sort of topics that I think are always top of mind. But you're right, the relationship between technology and employment has not been one of uniform job loss. The opposite, actually. It has created an enormous amount of prosperity, and the number of jobs on aggregate since the Industrial Revolution to today has greatly increased. The amount of life, right, in terms of human beings in the world has greatly increased as a result. Even things that may seem obviously as a category that should be replaced, for example, when ATMs were invented in the 1970s, you would say, well, there will be no more cashiers. And if you look over the next 30 years, the number of cashiers, right, and the number of employees in sort of branches of banks actually increased because it made it much cheaper to open more branches, and the aggregate number of people working in branches increased. So sometimes these relationships are very odd and weird. You're making a different point, which to the extent that you're a society that can do more and more of the work automatically, we could enjoy more leisure, right, or enjoy other things that we care about.
More creativity or whatever.
Right. So those are all possible. I tend to fall in the point of view that I'm neither like utopian or dystopian about it. Like, I don't think that in the end, like, it's gonna be sort of we're all gonna be devoted to like painting and the arts, and that we won't enjoy doing work. But it tends to be framed, I think I agree with you, it tends to be framed in those extreme terms. It's either gonna be total dystopia or utopia, and I think the reality is that it's gonna be neither of those, right?
To what extent, if there is job loss, will that affect people of high intellect or low intellect? In other words, are we talking about the replacement of innovators, the replacement of creators, or are we talking about what might be called Joe jobs?
I think back to the substitution. So I would encourage to substitute AI with the word software as an example. So let's try to ask the same question if we use software. So since we're more familiar with it, where is software replacing jobs or impacting jobs today? It's hard to say. If there were things that are very well-defined tasks that were very repetitive, certainly you can get to the point where software is doing that and you don't need those set of tasks done by people anymore. But in general, we've also seen that we all use software in our daily lives. We use it for personal productivity and enjoyment, and we use it at work. I think that what we'll see with AI is just a more powerful form of software. But software is touching every profession. So we like to say that AI is going to touch every profession by that very virtue, right? We're going to be using it, right, behind the scenes. Now, in terms of automation, a lot of what may be called menial tasks, but like things that involve like hand coordination or movement of things or, complex coordination of muscles, turns out it's very difficult for machines to do. It's way, way behind, right? So it's unlikely that those jobs are going to have a very significant impact in the next decade or so, driven by some of those machines. But then at the same time, there's other kinds of jobs like, I don't know, perhaps, look at accounting or tax preparation or some of the things where already we're seeing that software can do a great deal, and we'll probably be able to do a great deal more enabled by some of these narrow AI techniques embedded in software. So I don't think it's going to be uniform everywhere, the impact, but I think it will touch every profession, every single one in some form, because software today is almost universally touching everybody.
So if it's like software, you're saying that artificial intelligence might be compared to software, how susceptible, let's assume AI takes over major functions in our society, how susceptible is that to foreign interference, just as our software has been certainly affected? I mean...
Yeah, so I think that, again, back to this parallel of software, the part I don't like in general in the conversation of AI is we give too much agency to the technology, and I'll answer your question, as if it's this thing that lives by itself, like this AI who is out there in the world somehow is doing things. And when we substitute that with the word software, we never say software is out there on its own doing things. Somebody writes software, somebody deploys software, and somebody's responsible for the software that is running. So we give the agency back to where it belongs, to whoever creates it, whoever deploys it, whoever regulates it, right, and so on. So AI is nothing more than today than more capable libraries and mathematical algorithms are embedded in software so that it can learn better from data directly. If people write bad software or write bad AI and deploy it at scale, it causes a lot of havoc. So there's just no doubt about that. And it has the further complexity that in the traditional world of software, you wrote down the rules by hand, and you could sort of inspect what happened there. There's an aspect of this world of AI that there's an opacity to it, that because it learns the rule by giving it examples, who is giving those examples? So it's going to be very, very important that we pay enormous attention about who trains this AI that is embedded in the software. Who's going to take responsibility to make sure it was trained properly? And if there's bad actors that train it improperly or do the wrong thing, we're going to get bad outcomes. There's just no doubt about it. Agreed.
I was wondering if you could talk about AI in terms of systems of political control. And I'm thinking specifically of China and its efforts to quantify risk of individuals through the social credit score, and how you could use that to sort of identify when networks are forming of people at different risks and preemptively attack political dissent. So it seems to me that in this system, that's a very major threat. And how do you address that? And sort of if China and sort of has the potential in international relations to develop an AI system and export it, how do you address that threat without seeming to sort of attack an economic development more broadly?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, that's an example of the nature of the conversation there is back to bringing the agency where it belongs. It's like there is a societal choice, in this case, like, you know, a choice of the government of China, of how it wants to engage with its citizens and how it wants to monitor and what they want to do. I wouldn't give that AI is doing that. They're using technology, and the field of computer vision has been around for a long, long time. And because the technology is getting better and better, the ability to be able to take images of the citizenry, right, all around a city is doable today. So you can use that and combine it with other digital footprints like, you know, credit scores or, you know, monitoring amount of interactions, right? Like in terms of their public discourse and, you know, what they write in chats and so on. And they've made a political choice about how they want to engage with their citizens, right? Which is, you know, problematic from our side.
One quick follow-up.
Yes.
In China, only 6% of the population are members of the Chinese Communist Party. So fundamentally, you're talking about a very small percentage of the population able to control a much larger body. That's sort of how AI could develop in that respect.
Well, I think, again, technology, it's always been a tool that has been used for, you know, positive things and negative things by governments, you know, included, right? So I just think, I worry when we make it about, my general point I was making on that is, I worry when it says AI is doing this, is doing that. No, AI is not doing that, right? In this context is a government is deciding to use technology to pursue certain objectives. And because technology is more and more capable, you can pursue those objectives more efficiently than before. That's definitely true. But we could have similar conversations on genomics and what you could do with it if you went down the wrong road. So that's why there has to be very strong governance and very strong ethics that is aligned with societal and human aspirations as to what do we want to use technology for. I like to say that I'm not a technological determinist, right? I don't think technology should dictate the roles and what society should live in. I think we need to make those choices about what society we want and what values we want, and technology is a tool to accomplish those goals. But obviously, if governments choose to use technology for purposes that they think is appropriate, but we think are very misguided, as technology gets better, there'll be more and more power to do both good things and bad things. Oh, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you speak a little bit about the intersection? Could you speak a little bit about the intersection between artificial intelligence and the humanities beyond data scientists and engineers and mathematicians? Where are the opportunities for those who work in the humanities, ethicists and folks within law, and those that study history that have a long view? How do they integrate with the development along this timeline?
So I think the directions across many different disciplines goes both ways. So one is within the traditions and the richness of each discipline. They have to be able to contribute directly to the development of the future of AI, right? Because many different sort of intellectual traditions and methodologies and ways of thinking will contribute to something as fundamental as the pursuit of intelligence, right? So number one, as a very general. But the directionality will also go the other way. We're also seeing that the advances in the field of AI in its own right will have also big impact on how those different disciplines continue to evolve. As an example, just advances in the ability to do things like natural language processing, right? It is changing, and for some of the early adopters, altering how historical records are studied, the ability to access different intellectual traditions that perhaps could not be read in the original source by the ability to do translation automatically, and so on. So I think there's going to be a richness that is going to be, that the tools themselves are going to provide to pursue the different disciplines in a richer fashion, but also it has to go the other way. It's not about only using AI, but influencing how AI gets developed. So as an example, we created a joint laboratory with MIT about a couple years ago, which is the largest investment we've made in IBM with a university, right? $240 million over the next decade. And when we did it, the way we approach the portfolio of work we do it with the entire university. So in that context, all the different disciplines from, economics, right, and, history, and, I'm working with computer science and physics and chemistry and biology and medicine, jointly with Harvard, can contribute and make proposals. And so we take a whole university approach to collaborate and to imagine some of these possibilities as an example. So I think the field itself needs to do an even better job to broadly include all the different disciplines in its development, right? Because it's going to need it. Otherwise, I think it's very problematic when people who haven't thought about some of these broader topics are the ones put in a situation where ex novo, like they have to come up with things, and sometimes it can be sad and comical, right? That they are discovering things that have been part of the discourse for millennia, as if they're discovering it anew in a dorm somewhere.
So there's sort of a tension between individual and state these days, sort of the centralization of power. Is this a tool that Is AI a tool that would have the potential to empower the state or centralized power more so than individuals?
I'm not sure. So actually one characteristic of the development of AI is that it's extremely open. Contrary to other technologies, the algorithms associated with AI are all in the public literature. They're all open source, in fact. No one has magical algorithms that is like they're held somewhere. And this is very interesting compared to some other technologies where indeed it is very different, right? Where things are held very close to the chest. So the algorithms are very, very open. The amount of computation that is available thanks to the cloud and so on is very widely available. So it's not centralized by anybody. Of the three legs, the one that has the greater complexity is the data. And those institutions that control large amounts of data to be able to train these systems at scale do have a massive advantage compared to those that do not. And that would apply broadly to a government as well. So I think that that's the angle, and I think that where we're going to see the biggest amount of action, in my opinion, is going to be around the data and not the AI algorithms or the computation piece. And we're seeing that with the European Union as an example already. So the center of the action is going to be the data. Oh, please.
Tell us something about what philosophers are saying about artificial intelligence.
Well, I'm not sure. So I'll say, a few things. So for example, one category within the space of AI, and it comes across in self-driving cars and other things that have to do with autonomy, is to what degree do we have to embed in these kinds of systems some kind of form of moral reasoning, right? And the famous example, of course, which I'm sure we've all heard about, is like the trolley problem of if you are to make life and death decisions, what value system do you incorporate in those decisions? Do you build an AI car that is a utilitarian, right? Or do you build one that is really focused on maximizing the life of whoever is driving the car, right? Because they have a responsibility to whoever purchased it. What is the moral judgment that you do? And famously, we know that there's no simple right or wrong answer around that. It depends on a value system. Furthermore, those value systems change and vary, not massively, but they vary in considerable degree among different societies. And so the way technologists eventually think about this, because it's a problem we're not going to solve anytime soon, is eventually they'll say, well, so somebody else should decide that, right? And if you think about it, in reality, the answer is correct. It's like, who should decide that? Back to the question of the 24. It most certainly shouldn't be the 25-year-old in the who is coding this thing all of a sudden decide that everybody should be a utilitarian or so on. I mean, that's probably not appropriate. So there's going to have to be some set of choices that we're either going to express as consumers or buyers, or we regulate it. We go and we say, cars will behave in this fashion when confronted with an accident. But I think that choice is going to have to be made. So I think what philosophers, particularly, for example, in moral philosophy, will come across and say is, hey, these problems and these things have been studied for a long, long time. Here's a way how to think about this rigorously, and here's the choices that confront us now that we have technology with this degree of autonomy, rather than improvising the answer along the way. So I think those are fruitful conversations when they happen like that, and it's bringing the best of the disciplines together to think more clearly and in a more sophisticated fashion.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, we'll do one more. Go ahead.
So we talked a lot. At the beginning, you had a lot of questions about job loss. But it strikes me that there are kind of two components, that AI is a little bit like globalization. There's a greater good that may be being created, but there is the consequences include a concentration of wealth and job losses for certain people. So just taking the general AI category, i.e. AI that hasn't happened yet, that isn't happening for one more generation, if you are the kid standing in front of the AI debate computer, what would you say? What would your argument be if you're predicting what our landscape, both in terms of job and wealth, will look like in 2050 and beyond?
Yeah, what I would say is like, let's not make the debate about technology. Let's make the debate about what society we want, right? And technology will be a component, like you rightly said. I mean, there's globalization, there's lots of other things that have to do with accumulated wealth from the past. There's lots of different components that will shape what that society looks like. And that sometimes by making it about technology, we either make it really shiny and hopeful, right? Or we say all the problems are gonna be about that. And in a way, it shields us, right? In a way, it allows us to put all those problems in a box and talk about something else rather than the issue at heart. So I think if we can make choices about like that world of 2050, about what world we want or what society we want, I think that if we had clarity about some of those things, I bet technology could help us get us there. And technology would also get some problems that we would have to mitigate and watch out for. But it would be a tool to accomplish that goal. As I said before, in terms of that I'm not a technological determinist, is that I think when we surrender what that world is going to look like because of the rate of progress, I think we've lost something much bigger, right, than the bad outcomes of technology. And I think we should just resist that temptation. So, and in AI, again, just to close, I think it's really, really problematic that we treat AI as an independent entity. That's back to this idea of bringing it back to software. In the end, humans write it, humans deploy it, humans are responsible for it. Put the responsibility back on people in the institutions that create it, and don't talk about AI as a third person, as a thing that it's on its own in the world acting on us without any control. I think that that's what leads us astray.
Dr. Gil, thank you for a fascinating presentation and discussion.